My name is Amanda, and this is the story of how I survived growing up with a sister who could have given Machiavelli a run for his money. I was born in a small town to ordinary working-class parents. Mom was a receptionist at a local dentist's office, and Dad worked as a mechanic. They were good people, hardworking and honest, but perhaps a bit too trusting for their own good. When I came into the world, it was a difficult birth. The doctors told my mom she wouldn't be able to have any more children. So, for 5 years, I was their miracle baby, their only child. Those first 5 years were nice, normal. I have vague memories of picnics in the park, of Dad teaching me to ride a bike, of Mom reading me bedtime stories. But it all changed when I was 5, and my parents got the shock of their lives. Mom was pregnant again. I remember the day they told me I was going to be a big sister. They were practically glowing with excitement, and I caught their enthusiasm. I imagined having a little sister to play with, to share secrets with, to be best friends with. God, I was so naive. Sarah was born when I was 5.5. From the moment she came home from the hospital, it was like a switch had been flipped. Suddenly, I wasn't the miracle child anymore. Amanda, be quiet. Your sister's sleeping. Amanda, don't touch that. It's for your sister. Amanda, why can't you be more like your sister? It started small, you know? Little things that I brushed off as normal sibling stuff. But as Sarah grew, so did her talents. I remember her 7th birthday. Mom had spent hours on this beautiful cake, covered in delicate sugar roses. It was a work of art. The guests had just arrived when we heard Mom's horrified gasp from the kitchen. The cake was ruined, the roses all but destroyed. And there was Sarah, pointing at me with an accusing finger. Amanda did it, she said, her voice trembling in a way that adults find impossible to disbelieve. I saw her. I stood there, stunned, as Sarah produced my favorite t-shirt, now smeared with cake and frosting. I don't know how she got it, how she planned it all. She was 7, but she had the cunning of someone much older. I spent the rest of the party locked in my bedroom, listening to the muffled sounds of laughter and celebration downstairs. As the sun set and the house quieted, I heard my door creak open. Sarah stood there, a slice of cake in her hand and a smile on her face that sent chills down my spine. Want some cake, big sister? She whispered, her eyes glittering in the dim light. I saved you a piece. With a rose and everything. I stared at her, this young demon in a party dress, and felt the first stirrings of real fear. What kind of 7-year-old could pull off something like this? And more importantly, what else was she capable of? As the years rolled by, Sarah's manipulation tactics only grew more sophisticated. Every day became a new battle, and I was constantly on edge, wondering what she'd do next. When I was 14 and Sarah was 9, I started to notice my school supplies going missing or getting damaged. At first, I thought I was just being careless, misplacing things here and there. But then I started finding my notebooks with pages torn out, pencils broken in half, and textbooks with scribbles all over the important parts. One day, I caught Sarah red-handed, a pair of scissors in her hand and my history essay in shreds on her bedroom floor. "What are you doing?" I yelled, snatching the remains of my homework from her. Sarah's eyes welled up with crocodile tears. I was just trying to help you cut out some pictures for your project," she sniffled. "This isn't a project, it's my essay. It's due tomorrow." But it was too late. Mom had heard the commotion and came running. "What's going on here?" Before I could explain, Sarah burst into full-blown sobs. I was just trying to help Amanda with her homework, but she yelled at me. Mom turned to me, her face a mask of disappointment. "Amanda, how could you? Your sister was only trying to help. Apologize to your sister right now." I stood there, seething with anger and frustration. Sarah peeked at me from behind Mom's legs, a sly smile playing on her lips. "I'm sorry," I gritted out, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. That night, I had to stay up until 3 a.m. rewriting my essay. The next day at school, I could barely keep my eyes open. My teacher wasn't impressed with my sloppy handwriting and obvious fatigue. Amanda, this isn't like you, she said, frowning at my paper. Please put more effort into your schoolwork. I'd hate to have to call your parents. But of course, she did end up calling my parents. And of course, they blamed me for not being responsible enough, for not taking my studies seriously. Sarah sat at the dinner table, quietly eating her food with a satisfied smirk, as Mom and Dad lectured me about the importance of education. As I grew older, Sarah's tactics evolved. When I started showing interest in boys in high school, she found new ways to torment me. My first boyfriend, Jake, broke up with me after hearing a rumor that I'd been cheating on him with his best friend. I was devastated, but when I confronted Sarah about it, she just shrugged. How could I have started that rumor, she said innocently. I don't even know your friends from school. But I saw the glint in her eye, the barely concealed satisfaction at my pain. She was getting better at covering her tracks, at maintaining her facade of innocence. As my high school years progressed, I became more determined than ever to secure my escape. I poured all my energy into a special project that I hoped would be my ticket to a prestigious college far away from Sarah's clutches. But I knew better than to let my guard down, even for a moment. My friend Melissa was the only person I truly trusted. We'd been close since elementary school, and she was well aware of Sarah's true nature. I need you to keep something for me, I told her one afternoon as we sat in her room. I pulled out a thick folder from my backpack. This is my project for the university grant competition. If I win, I get a full ride to Westfield College. Wow, that's amazing, Melissa exclaimed, then her face fell slightly. But, why are you giving it to me? I took a deep breath. Because if Sarah finds out how important this is to me, she'll find a way to destroy it. I need you to keep it safe. I'll work on a dummy version at home. Melissa's eyes widened in understanding. Clever, she said, taking the folder and locking it in her desk drawer. Don't worry, I'll guard it with my life. For weeks, I worked on 2 versions of the project, the real one, safely tucked away at Melissa's house, and a decoy version at home. I made sure to leave the decoy version conspicuously on my desk, knowing Sarah wouldn't be able to resist snooping. The day before the submission deadline, it happened. I was in the kitchen when I heard Sarah's sickeningly sweet voice. Oh no, Amanda, I'm so sorry. I rushed to the living room to find Sarah standing over my desk, a glass of orange juice appended over my decoy project. Papers were soaked, ink running in streaks across the pages. I was just bringing you a drink, Sarah said, her eyes wide with feigned innocence. I tripped. It was an accident, I swear. Our parents came running at the commotion. Mom gasped at the sight of the ruined papers. Oh, Amanda, she sighed. You should be more careful about where you leave important things. I saw the glint of triumph in Sarah's eyes, the slight upturn of her lips as she waited for my reaction. But this time I was ready. I smiled. The look of confusion on Sarah's face was almost comical. It's okay, I said calmly. That was just a backup copy. I already submitted the real project last week. The triumph in Sarah's eyes flickered and died, replaced by a flash of anger so quick I almost missed it. Our parents, oblivious as always, praised me for my foresight. A few weeks later, the results of the competition were announced. I'd won the grant, a full scholarship to Westfield College, 3 states away. As I read the acceptance letter, tears of joy and relief streamed down my face. I was getting out. I was finally escaping. But my moment of triumph was short-lived. As I packed my bags for college, I overheard my parents talking in hushed tones. It's a shame, Mom was saying. I wish Sarah had gotten an opportunity like this. She deserves it more. I know, Dad agreed. Amanda's smart, but Sarah, she's special. She could really go places with a chance like that. Their words stung, but I was past caring. In a few days, I'd be gone, starting a new life far away from Sarah's manipulations and my parents' blind favoritism. The next few years were like a breath of fresh air. At Westfield College, I thrived. I made genuine friends, excelled in my studies, and even started to heal from the emotional trauma of my childhood. I majored in finance, discovering a talent for numbers and analysis that I never knew I had. Whatever the reason, I graduated at the top of my class and landed a job at a prestigious financial firm in the city. Life was good. I had my own apartment, a job I loved, and a sense of peace I'd never known before. I kept in touch with my parents, visiting them on holidays and occasional weekends, but these visits were always tense. Sarah was still living at home, having chosen to attend a local community college. Every time I saw her, I could feel her resentment simmering just beneath the surface. It was a typical Friday at work when I got the call that would shatter my carefully constructed peace. I was in the middle of analyzing some market trends when my phone buzzed. It was my mother. "Amanda," she said, her voice tight with tension. "We need to talk. It's about your sister. She's graduating soon, and, well, we think it would be best if she came to live with you in the city." I nearly dropped the phone. "What? Mom, no. That's not possible." "Don't be selfish, Amanda," my mother snapped. "Sarah needs this opportunity. And you have that big apartment all to yourself. Plus, we need you to cover her tuition for college." I felt like I was drowning. All the old feelings of helplessness and fear came rushing back. "Mom, I can't. My apartment isn't big enough, and I can't afford." "Can't afford it?" my mother interrupted. "With that fancy job of yours? Don't lie to us, Amanda. We know you're doing well for yourself." I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "Mom, it's not about the money. Sarah and we don't get along. You know that." "Oh, not this again," my mother sighed. "Amanda, when are you going to let go of this childish jealousy? Your sister needs you. This is what family does." I closed my eyes, feeling a headache coming on. "I'm sorry, Mom. The answer is no. I can't have Sarah living with me, and I won't pay for her tuition. I have my own life, my own expenses." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. When my mother spoke again, her voice was cold. "I see. Well, I hope you're happy with your decision, Amanda. Don't bother coming home for Christmas this year." Later that evening, as I was trying to distract myself with work, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text from Sarah. "You'll regret this," it read. Just 3 words, but they sent a chill down my spine. I tried to shake it off. Sarah was hundreds of miles away. What could she possibly do to me now? Months flew by after that tense phone call with my parents. I threw myself into my work, trying to push thoughts of my family to the back of my mind. My life in the city continued. I excelled at my job, made new friends, and even started dating a bit. Then, on a random Tuesday, my phone rang. It was my mother. "Amanda," she said, her voice uncharacteristically hesitant. "We need you to come home. It's important." Against my better judgment, I took a month's vacation from work and boarded a plane back to my hometown. As I walked up the familiar driveway, a sense of dread washed over me. What could be so important that they needed me home for a whole month? We gathered in the living room, an uneasy silence falling over us. Finally, my mother spoke. "Your great-aunt Mildred called us," she said. "She wants all 4 of us to visit her in Hawaii. She's even booked the plane tickets herself." I blinked in surprise. Aunt Mildred had always been kind to me as a child, but I hadn't seen her in years. "All 4 of us?" I asked, glancing at Sarah. Sarah snorted. "It's ridiculous. Amanda doesn't need to go. She hasn't even talked to Aunt Mildred in years." "Hush," my father said sternly. This was Mildred's condition. All 4 of us, or none of us. An uncomfortable silence fell over the room. I could almost see the gears turning in everyone's heads. Finally, my mother voiced what we were all thinking. Do you think she might be dying? That this is about her will?" The atmosphere in the room shifted. I saw a glimmer of something in Sarah's eyes. Greed? Excitement? It made me uneasy. We shouldn't jump to conclusions, I said quickly. Maybe she just wants to see all of us. But even as I said it, I knew it was unlikely. Aunt Mildred had always been a bit of a recluse. For her to suddenly want a family reunion in Hawaii, it had to be something big. As we discussed the logistics of the trip, I found myself getting excited despite my reservations. I had fond memories of Aunt Mildred from my childhood. She had always been kind to me, always had a moment to listen when no one else did. The thought of seeing her again, of spending time in beautiful Hawaii, was appealing. But there was still a nagging worry in the back of my mind. I glanced at Sarah, who had been uncharacteristically quiet since her initial outburst. She caught my eye and smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. It was the same smile she'd given me countless times before pulling some elaborate scheme to get me in trouble. I tried to shake off the feeling. We were adults now. Surely Sarah wouldn't try anything, not with so much potentially at stake. And yet, the day of our departure finally arrived. Despite my lingering unease, I found myself caught up in the excitement of the trip. We arrived at the airport, our family presenting a united front for what felt like the first time in years. As we approached the security checkpoint, I allowed myself to hope that maybe, just maybe, this trip could be a fresh start for all of us. How naive I was. Just as we were about to go through security, a stern-faced officer approached me. "Ma'am, I need you to come with me," he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. Confused and a little scared, I looked at my family. "What's going on?" The officer's face remained impassive. "We received an anonymous tip that you're carrying prohibited items in your luggage. We need to do a thorough check." My heart sank as I turned to look at Sarah. There it was, that familiar gleeful smile, the one that always spelled trouble for me. In that moment, I knew exactly what had happened. "It was her," I said, pointing at Sarah. "She sent that message. She's trying to sabotage me." My parents' faces clouded over with anger, but to my shock, it was directed at me. "Amanda," my mother hissed. "How dare you accuse your sister like that? Again with this nonsense?" I tried to protest, but my father cut me off. "Enough, Amanda. Go with the officer. We'll sort this out." Just then, an announcement echoed through the terminal: final boarding call for Flight 372 to Honolulu. My parents exchanged a look of panic. "That's our flight," my mother said. "Please," I begged, my voice cracking. "Wait for me. I'll sort this out quickly, I promise." But my pleas fell on deaf ears. My father shook his head, not meeting my eyes. "We can't miss this flight, Amanda. You know how important this is." "We'll see you in Hawaii," my mother added, already turning away. I watched in disbelief as my parents walked away, not even glancing back. Only Sarah looked back, her triumphant smile cutting me to the core. Then she too disappeared into the crowd, leaving me alone with the security officer. The next few hours were a blur of invasive searches and endless questions. They went through every item in my luggage, every pocket of my clothing. I had to wait for a female officer to be available for a pat-down. By the time they finally concluded that I wasn't carrying anything illegal, my family's plane was long gone. As I sat in the now quiet airport, I faced a choice. I could book a flight for the next day, join my family in Hawaii, and try to salvage this disaster of a trip. Or I looked at the departure board. There was a flight leaving for my city in an hour. Back to my job, my friends, my life. Away from the drama and pain that seemed to follow my family wherever they went. In that moment, I made my decision. I walked up to the ticket counter and bought a one-way ticket home. As I boarded the plane, I felt a mixture of hurt, anger, and an odd sense of relief. Yes, I was letting Aunt Mildred down, and I felt guilty about that. But for once, I was choosing myself. My peace, my sanity. A few days after returning home, I was settling back into my routine, trying to push the airport incident out of my mind. I was just beginning to relax when my phone rang. It was my mother. Amanda, her voice trembled, thick with emotion. My heart raced, sensing something was terribly wrong. Your sister. Sarah's been arrested. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Arrested? What for? My mother's story came out in a rush of words, each one more shocking than the last. They had arrived at Aunt Mildred's house in Hawaii, only to find her furious that I wasn't there. She refused to discuss her will without all four of us present, Mom explained. We had to stay at her house while we tried to figure out what to do. I felt a pang of guilt, quickly overshadowed by my mother's next words. Then it happened. Your aunt, she almost fell down the stairs. She could have broken her neck, Amanda. What? Is she okay? I asked, concerned for the aunt I remembered so fondly. She's fine, thank goodness. But Amanda, it wasn't an accident. It was Sarah. She pushed her. I felt the blood drain from my face. How do you know? There were cameras. Hidden all over the house. They caught everything. The pieces started falling into place. The anonymous tip at the airport, Sarah's triumphant smile, it had all been part of her plan. A plan that had backfired spectacularly. Aunt Mildred called the police, my mother continued, her voice breaking. When they came to arrest Sarah, she lost it. Started screaming about how she just wanted the money, how she'd been waiting for years for this opportunity. I listened in stunned silence as my mother recounted Sarah's meltdown. How she'd screamed that she hated our parents, that she was just waiting for them to die so she could inherit everything. We were blind, Amanda, my mother sobbed. How could we not have seen it? How could we have been so wrong about her? As I listened to my mother's broken words, a whirlwind of emotions swept through me. Shock at Sarah's actions. Vindication that her true nature had finally been revealed. Sadness for my parents, whose world had just been shattered. And buried beneath it all, a tiny, shameful spark of satisfaction that they finally understood what I'd been trying to tell them for years. As we ended the call, I sat in silence, trying to wrap my head around everything that had happened. The sister I'd grown up with, who I'd always known was manipulative, had crossed a line I never thought possible. She'd tried to seriously harm our great-aunt, all for the chance at an inheritance. When I arrived at my childhood home, the atmosphere was completely different from my last visit. Gone was the tension and unspoken resentment. Instead, I found my parents looking older, more vulnerable, but also more open than I'd ever seen them. Amanda, my mother said, her voice thick with emotion as she embraced me. We're so sorry. We've been blind for so long. My father, a man never comfortable with emotional displays, simply placed a hand on my shoulder. We should have listened to you, he said gruffly. Can you forgive us? It was a moment I'd dreamed of for years, but now that it was here, I found myself overwhelmed. Of course, I managed to say, tears welling up in my eyes. Of course I forgive you. We spent hours talking, really talking, for what felt like the first time in years. They shared their shock at Sarah's actions, their guilt over dismissing my concerns for so long, and their fear for the future. I listened, offering support and finally feeling heard. But our fragile peace was soon shattered. We received word that Aunt Mildred had withdrawn her statement to the police, and Sarah was being released. The news hit us like a physical blow. She can't come back here, my father said, his voice firm. We can't trust her anymore. What followed was a painful but necessary process. My parents, with my support, filed for Sarah's eviction. They presented the court with evidence of her threats in Hawaii, her actions towards Aunt Mildred, along with a history of manipulative behavior. The court ruled in our favor. Sarah was to be evicted from the family home. When she came, my parents didn't even let her in the house. They left her belongings on the porch, a final, symbolic separation. Sarah's response was predictably spiteful. As she drove away, presumably out of our lives for good, she left one last parting shot, a string of vicious curses spray-painted on the side of the house. It was childish, petty, and so typically Sarah that it almost made me laugh. Almost. Then, out of the blue, I received a call from Aunt Mildred. "Amanda, dear," she said, her voice warm despite everything that had happened. "I think it's time you came to visit me in Hawaii. Just you this time." I was hesitant at first, but something in her voice convinced me. A week later, I found myself on a plane to Hawaii, unsure of what to expect. Aunt Mildred's house was beautiful, perched on a cliff overlooking the ocean. She greeted me with a warm hug, looking far more spry than I'd imagined given recent events. "I'm so glad you're here," she said, leading me into her study. "There's something I need to show you." She pulled out a document, her will. As I scanned the pages, my eyes widened in shock. Aunt Mildred had left everything, her house, her investments, everything, to me. "But, why?" I stammered, looking up at her in disbelief. Aunt Mildred smiled, a twinkle in her eye. "Because, my dear, you're the only one who never came here looking for a handout. You're the only one who saw me as family, not as a potential windfall." More than the inheritance itself, what touched me was the recognition. After years of being overlooked and dismissed, someone had seen my true worth. As I hugged Aunt Mildred, tears in my eyes, I felt like I was finally, truly coming home.